When I was 16, a touring carnival came to my hometown, about 20 miles outside of Milwaukee. It was a Saturday night and I went with 5 of my friends, whose names I won't bore you with, except for Billy, who this story is about. We arrived just after 8 and it was busier than I thought it would be. It had all the usual attractions. There were games, stalls, small food venues and a huge funhouse which seemed to be the center of it all, and there were various employees enticing all the passers-by inside. I was hoping to get some food and maybe go on the dodgems first of all, but one of my friends had been roped in straight away to go in the funhouse. You had to pay $5 each, which was on top of the admission ticket to the carnival, but it looked like we were going in anyway, so I got my wallet out and handed over the money. There was a small queue and they let you in small groups, but before long the heavy plastic curtain was cast aside and we went in. You had to wait in this tiny dark room for about 30 seconds, before a wild-haired lady burst through a door and screamed in our faces, then began to cackle. She went through the rules of no running, no hitting the actors and no messing around. After that, we went through another door and into the main funhouse. Straight away, we were hit by the smell of stage smoke and there were green and red lights everywhere. A few actors jumped out on us and they really went for it, even using abusive language, which to a 16-year-old was quite shocking. We slowly went through the different themed rooms. There was of course a hall of mirrors, a random and disturbing dark fairy tale room and half a dozen others, including a strongman arena, where the ground was covered in straw, and some crazy steroid clown began to scream at us. He was holding a large hammer and there was one of those high striker challenges just before the exit of the room. The clown smashed the hammer down and the shaft lit up to the top. He then picked me to try next. I only weighed about 150 pounds at the time, but Billy, who I mentioned before, exercised daily. He took the hammer off the guy and paused for a moment, then hit it down as hard as he could. To our amazement, the entire shaft lit up, and the word winner was highlighted at the top. Billy abruptly handed the hammer back to the clown, who appeared motionless, and we carried on through the funhouse. It was about 5 minutes later, when we were in the second hall of mirrors room, when some people, and I think it was 2 women, ran past us screaming. We could hear shouting and the strongman clown came running at us, swinging the hammer like a maniac. He smashed a few of the mirrors and we ran out of that room, but in the panic, someone had made a wrong turn as we ended up in some kind of access tunnel. We were able to lock the door shut that we had just come out of, but something, presumably the clown, began thumping on it. We quickly found an exit door, but it had some kind of weird safety bar that prevented us from opening it. Meanwhile, the other door was slowly coming down. One of my friends took a run up and did a flying kick at the exit door, hitting that safety bar which caused it to swing open. We all piled out of the funhouse as various employees shouted at us for being in the restricted section. We were all so scared that we didn't even tell anybody about what had happened. We just went home. Billy told me some weeks later that his phone would often ring in the middle of the night, with nobody talking on the other end. There was just breathing, and he suffered terrible nightmares after that night in the funhouse. Last September, the Strangeways Carnival set up just outside of our town, so I went there with my girlfriend Amy, as neither of us had been to a carnival as adults, only as kids. We went on a Thursday night, and as soon as we were through the gates, we made the most of it. Amy particularly enjoyed the ring toss, and I had a knack for the shooting gallery, but both of us were most looking forward to the big top, and we queued for almost an hour to get inside. We got good seats, and were given a special token card, which had a picture of a clown on one side, and on the other, it said higher or lower, left or right, and a question mark. As the lights dimmed, there was a moment of silence, and then there was a huge explosion as 2 glamorous women walked onto the stage and loud rock music played. The women screamed over the microphone to stand and give it up for Miles the Malicious. Some stood straight away, others sat and some booed in jest. But as soon as the demonic-looking Miles ran onto the stage with about as much charisma as I've ever seen, everyone stood and clapped as he roared with excitement. Miles said that we had one heck of a show to come, and gave anyone who was squeamish one last chance to leave. When nobody left, he pulled a hammer out of his back pocket and ran into the audience, grabbing the hand of a middle-aged blonde lady and got her up on stage. He whispered something into her ear and then placed the tip of a large nail into his nostril. On cue, the lady began to gently hammer the nail into Miles' nose. It was quite sickening to see, and the audience gasped until it finally disappeared. Miles made a joke that he just got nailed, and then reached into his nostril and pulled the nail out, and asked us all to give the lady a round of applause. After that, some other acts followed, including a fire eater, a duo tightrope act with no safety net, a contortionist, and a bizarre hypnotist that pulled people out of the audience and seemed to convince them that they were various animals, after speaking to them for only a few minutes each. The final act, Miles was to perform himself, and the drums began. The two assistants escorted a young man onto the stage. Miles asked him his name and he replied that it was Andy. Miles then asked Andy if he was nervous, to which he replied yes. Miles grinned and said to the audience that he definitely should be. This seemed in bad taste as the guy was clearly apprehensive, and Amy remarked to me that it seemed very harsh. The assistants walked him over to a giant wooden wheel, strapping him in so that his arms and legs were outstretched. They then gave it a test spin and Miles laid out 5 large knives on a small table, inspecting each one closely. He then placed a blindfold on and picked up one of the smaller knives, aiming it at Andy. Miles' assistants told everyone to help him aim, whether to go higher or lower, left or right. The audience shouted out conflicting directions and Miles threw the knife anyway, which landed about a foot away from Andy's left leg. The second knife was bigger and Miles pretended to be frustrated with the audience, then threw it hard. This time it hit the wood by Andy's neck. Miles momentarily took off his blindfold and made a joke, then quickly picked up the third knife and it hit an inch or so above Andy's head. The fourth landed just beside it and the audience gasped. The fifth knife was large. Miles, who had now discarded the blindfold, walked up to Andy and whispered something in his ear. Then as he was walking back, I could have sworn that Andy shouted out that he'd pay up. Miles ignored this and nodded to his assistants, who spun the wheel. Miles held up the knife, he closed his eyes and then turned and threw it with surprising force, and Andy screamed. I couldn't quite believe my eyes. The knife was protruding from Andy's stomach. Before the crowd could even acknowledge the carnage on stage, Miles shrugged his shoulders merrily and said that accidents can and will happen, then waved and ran off stage. It was then that people started to scream and head for the exits as an ambulance crew came into the big top. Now I'm not usually a betting man, but I'd put money on the fact that Andy owed this demonic clown some money, and that money hadn't been paid. The consequence was to appear in one of his acts, where health and safety was certainly not a factor. Last fall, when I was in between permanent jobs, I took a temporary security role at the Fantasy Fables Carnival. The hours were long, and most of the job was either standing around watching the crowd or directing people who wanted to know where the different attractions were. To describe the other security guys, I'd have to say they were firm but fair. A few of them were ex-cons and knew every trick in the book, and they knew who to watch too. That's why they were hired, I guess. The carnival workers were not how I imagined though. Sure, they were extrovert and over the top when the spotlight was on them, but behind the scenes they mostly kept to themselves and were quite secretive. Mess with one of them though, and you've got 30 angry carnies coming after you, and they don't hold back. One particular night, I witnessed this firsthand, and it is something that I'll never forget, as long as I live. It was the last night in a town just outside Pittsburgh, and there was a strange atmosphere about the place. I later heard that a group of people had been thrown out of a local bar and had staggered to the carnival, drunk or high, or maybe both. We spotted them right away and kept eyes on them all night. But apart from pushing and shoving each other, they weren't too much of a problem. I was particularly tired that night and just wanted to get through so I could help the others pack up, then go home to bed. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. At about 9:30, we got a radio call to go to the back of the Dark Wonderland Funhouse, as Mark, who was security in there, needed assistance as he was on his own. I got there as fast as I could, and the exit door was soon kicked open as a man, who looked to be in his 30s, and another woman were being thrown out. They were cursing and swiping at us, stinking of booze. Apparently there had been some sort of altercation in there, and the two biggest security guys, Robert and Tyler, came over to escort them both away. Before they could get rid of them though, one of the actors from the funhouse came out. I only knew her as Harley Quinn, and she was furious, screaming at the drunken couple with the foulest language I've ever heard. We actually had to keep her from attacking the couple, who were soon led away and thrown out of the carnival. Mark thanked me and gave the Harley Quinn a cigarette, trying to calm her down. After 10 or 15 minutes, she said she was okay, and went back into the funhouse. For the next few hours, there were no real problems. It took a while to get everyone to leave, which can be frustrating, but it was the last night and people just wanted to get their money's worth, I guess. It was about midnight when it happened. The carnival was empty, the gates were locked, and I got a radio call to head to the funhouse for the second time that night. I was confused, but went there quickly and saw some of the actors standing around outside with bottles of beer. Tyler came out of the exit and handed me a cold bottle and said I deserved it, then beckoned me inside. We walked through the dark platforms and tunnels until we got to roughly the center of the building. I got a strange feeling that something was off, and I was right. That couple who had been kicked out before were somehow back inside of the funhouse. They'd been beat up and their hands and feet were tied. The Harley Quinn was taunting both of them as they sobbed in fear and kept saying that they were sorry. Tyler looked at me and said that this happened sometimes, and nobody would ever know. I replied that I didn't want a part in this, but Tyler said that I already did. He encouraged me to drink the beer and get ready for the show. My heart was pounding, and I didn't know how to escape. I couldn't exactly run through 10 doormen who were pumped up on steroids and now surrounded me, but I didn't want any part in this sick game either. Whatever that couple had done, I'm sure it couldn't have been bad enough to warrant this. I was told to move along as all of the scare actors began to fill the place up. They seemed excited, laughing and joking and asking each other who would win. The Harley Quinn looked around to see who was present, then turned to face the terrified couple and cut their restraints. She dropped 2 pipes onto the floor and said that all they had to do was find the exit, and they had a 30-second head start. Before the couple could say anything, the Harley Quinn sounded a foghorn that made everybody jump, and they ran. The Harley Quinn worked the small crowd that was watching her, asking for applause and appreciation as she went through a variety of weapons, carefully considering each one, until she decided on a crossbow. The 30 seconds was up, and she ran off, into the mazes of the funhouse. We were standing on a suspended bridge at the top, overlooking everything. You could see the couple arguing over which direction to go, as the predatory Harley Quinn zeroed in. The crowd were shuffling along, trying their best to see, and I thought I wouldn't get a better chance than this to leave, as everybody was distracted. I took a step back and cautiously made my way through, trying not to look angry or scared, and soon there was only the back stairs to negotiate. I opened the exit door as I heard a muffled, but loud thump from somewhere behind me, and the cheer of the crowd. She had gotten to them quicker than I thought. I walked quickly and quietly through the carnival and climbed the fence to my car, then I drove back to my apartment with a million thoughts going through my head. You might ask why I didn't contact the authorities or do anything to help. As I said, you mess with one of these people, you mess with all of them. They had my name, address, and emergency contact numbers. All I could do was lay low and hope that the next town that the Fantasy Fables Carnival travels to has more respectful customers, because I was damn sure that the drunken couple were taken care of forever.